Tonight, Confronting the Presidents.
These are real people.
You're bringing them to life.
In his new book, Bill OReilly gives no-spin assessments of every commander-in-chief in American history.
The reason I'm the best-selling nonfiction author in the world is because my books are fun to read.
Bill will count down the 5 worst.
They were bad presidents because they failed to run the country effectively. He was awful. He was the most boring guy in the world. He wins the Triple Crown: venal, cowardly, and stupid.
And his 5 best.
People loved him. He did a lot of really gutsy things at work. He was a good commander-in-chief because he won.
The untold stories from Washington.
So Washington and his mother didn't like each other at all.
To Biden.
I don't dislike Joe Biden. I just think he's been a disaster for the country.
What are the lessons in the book for either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
Get ready for a history lesson like no other.
And nobody watching today was taught this in school.
This is Bill OReilly's Confronting the Presidents, America's best and worst.
Good evening, I'm Leland Vittert. Here in Washington, we spend a lot of time talking about presidents. So it's only fitting and proper we honor those who founded the country and created the shining city on the hill. But let's face it, some presidents did the job better than others. Tonight, we're going to celebrate the 5 best and show you how they achieved greatness. But first, we want to count down the 5 worst and pinpoint the lessons we can learn from their failures. And who better to guide us than the man who's written the book on the subject, literally.
Bill OReilly and his writing partner Martin Dugard have become a publishing phenom. And if you didn't know that already, Bill's happy to tell you.
You are the authors of 18 #1 bestsellers, at least that's what it says.
What do you mean? No, that's what it is.
Okay, just
Okay.
okay. That's what it is. 18.
Let me just cut through. Dugard and I are the most successful nonfiction authors in the world.
Killing Lincoln, killing Kennedy, killing Reagan. As evidenced by his massive collection of presidential memorabilia, Bill OReilly obsesses about the American presidency, thus confronting the presidents.
Okay, no-spin assessments from Washington to Biden. What does a no-spin assessment entail?
It basically means that we are going in with no agenda. My job as a historian is different than most historians because I want you to know the person.
You say confronting the presidents. What are you confronting them with?
Strengths and weaknesses. That's actually a good question.
So you're assessing their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, it's a simple concept because I'm a simple man. Did the president you are reading about help or hurt the country? That's how you write history, not 800 pages about Grover Cleveland running around in upstate New York. Grover Cleveland's mom wouldn't even read that.
Former high school history teacher.
I'm the original Mr. Cotter. I taught in a school in Miami, Florida. Tough school. You can imagine how hard it was to arrest the attention of those students. So I had to break it down, get their attention, and tell them, this guy did this. And then they go. And they want to know more. And that's the secret. It's fun to read it, and you learn at the same time.
As we go through, we have your list, top 5 worst, top 5 best. Harder to pick the top 5 worst or harder to pick the top 5 best?
The best were, because most of the presidents of the United States were caught up in circumstances beyond their control. That's number 1. Number 2 is they're just regular people who got into this situation, and how they reacted defines them in their office.
So we start the countdown with Bill OReilly's 5th worst. The 14th man to hold the office, Franklin Pierce. Pierce was pro-slavery, despite coming from New Hampshire. He signed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, bringing on a guerrilla war in Kansas between pro- and anti-slavery factions. He enforced the Fugitive Slave Act, and that's not all.
Franklin Pierce was a drunk, number 1. And that really affected his ability to make decisions and to even function on some days, and his wife was appalled by his condition, and there was friction. Pierce looks a little serious there, right? He's giving you a little look, the little penetrating gaze. But in his pocket, you don't see it in the picture there, there's a flask. See,
always had something there.
Yeah, he was
always at the ready.
A big tippler, and then he lost a child, and he never really got over that. And then he had a nervous breakdown that nobody knew about, and that affected the way he ran the country. And then slavery was the white-hot issue, and all Pierce wanted to do was just get rid of it. We'll have a compromise here, we'll have this. We didn't want to solve it, we just want to put it down the road. He didn't do anything. What did he do? He didn't do anything. He kind of just sat there and got drunk every night at the taxpayers' expense.
It's pretty interesting. Of the three modern presidents, right? Bush, Obama, Trump, not drinkers.
Teetotalers. They don't. I've been out with Trump many times, and the strongest thing he has is a vanilla milkshake.
Diet Coke. That's his favorite.
Drinks a lot of Diet Coke. And that's why his hair is the way it is, by the way. Can't drink that stuff. That's bad for you. Franklin Pierce was a drunk. You cannot do that job if you are impaired. And he was. And that's why everything collapsed around him.
Not because he was a pro-slavery Northerner.
Look, at the time, there were people who were pro-slavery.
Jefferson, Washington.
They had slaves.
Right.
Okay. Do the other good things you do override that?
And Pierce didn't have anything good.
He didn't do anything. He was not a person who had much feeling for other people. He did not bring to the White House a sense of morality.
Bill ranks John Tyler his fourth worst president. The Virginia plantation owner became president when Henry Harrison died 31 days after taking office. Tyler championed states' rights, and his failures are too numerous to list. John Tyler, first vice president to take over as president. In the book, you note that his nickname was his accidency.
John Tyler was a mediocrity, except in one area. He had 16 children. So he was a kind of lively guy at times. So there's John. He didn't govern very well, saved his energy for other things. One of the worst presidents, and he looks a little tired, and you would be too if you had 16 children.
So John Tyler takes over as president in 1841 and does what?
Nothing. Because everybody hated him. His own party hated him. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. The only reason that he was on a ticket with Harrison is because he was pro-slavery. And Harrison needed some southern states. That's it. Nobody thought this clown was ever going to be president, Tyler, all right? And then he gets to be president. His own party hates him. Everything he tried to do, Congress said, no, we hate you, we're not doing it. He didn't do anything.
Pretty weak guy, right? I mean, he doesn't even fire the cabinet and get his own people in.
Well, I don't think he could have done anything. Nobody would even talk to him. But the worst thing, and why he made the list, is because he liked slavery. He liked it. Come on, you can't do that. There were others like Washington and Jefferson who held slaves. They didn't like it. They were conflicted about it. Okay, Tyler wasn't conflicted. He wanted more of it. Let's bring it on. Awful. So that wasn't a tough call at all for me to put him on the worst list. He was a cheerleader for slavery. There's nothing else that he did because he served such a short time. He got nothing done at all. Nothing.
But even some presidents who got a lot done have earned spots as Bill OReilly's even worse presidents. Who's worse than a pro-slavery drunk?
How ridiculous is that? How crazy is that?
When we continue. Lyndon Johnson takes bronze as Bill OReilly's third worst president.
I urge every American to join in this effort to bring justice and hope to all our people.
Johnson took the oath of office on Air Force One, heading back from JFK's assassination, and got to work on sweeping social reform known as the Great Society. He championed civil rights legislation, but his massive escalation of the Vietnam War forced him to step aside in 1968.
I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
You give Johnson credit for the Voting Rights Act, for the Civil Rights Act, for Medicare, which at the time took a lot of political muscle, and he spent a lot of political capital to get through. Yet he is the third worst.
He did good, but the bad outweighs it in a tremendous way.
Jimmy Carter bowed to the Soviets, led to a terrible economic crisis in America, the Iran hostage crisis. You got Herbert Hoover, couldn't figure our way out of a Great Depression. What is it about Johnson that was so awful that it outweighed the three huge achievements and still ended up worse than Carter and Hoover?
There are two reasons why. Number one, he was a crook. So Johnson trafficked with his crew in blackmail. He lived across the street from J. Edgar Hoover, and their hobby was blackmailing people to get what they wanted. And they set up a bordello, a brothel, and some big politicians used it. And they used that because they were secretly taping against those politicians. So Lyndon Johnson, bad. Number two is he put his own self-interest above the lives of the American military.
So it was all about Vietnam.
80%. And the Vietnam War was a catastrophe for this country. And he knew it was going bad, but he wouldn't admit it. So he's telling the American people, oh no, we're winning.
We have made a national pledge to help South Vietnam defend its independence. And I intend to keep that promise.
It was bull. The United States wanted to go in and kick some Hanoi butt. How ridiculous is that? How crazy is that?
O'Reilly says the Vietnam War catastrophe might never have happened if JFK hadn't picked Johnson as his running mate in 1960.
August 17, 1960, from then Senate Democratic leader Lyndon Baines Johnson.
So he's writing to his pal Omar Burlington in the House of Representatives saying, hey, the Kennedy brothers are very, very smart to pick me because now they'll take Texas and the South, which was true. The Kennedys didn't like Johnson because they thought he was a hillbilly, and he knew it. But he took it that LBJ wanted power, and he was right. They won the election. One thing that JFK did do that most people don't know is that he would have pulled the troops out of Vietnam. He had signed the directive to pull them out, the U.S. troops. And then he was assassinated, and one of the first things that Johnson did when he took over was to tear up that directive.
Man, you have it out for Johnson.
Well, I have it out for the Vietnam War, because that's my contemporaries, and that never should have happened.
There's a lot of sort of legendary stories about what you call it, the grotesqueness of Lyndon Johnson. At lunch, he would grab food off of other people's plates. There were stories that he would talk to aides as he used the commode.
Well, he was raised in South Texas in a time when many people were crude.
He was a bully, though.
Oh, yeah, but that was part of his persona. And he got his way by just bullying people all over the place.
Confronting the Presidents describes Johnson's management style. Staff are expected to be available at all times. Johnson can be verbally abusive with a random list of things that annoy him, among them the colors purple and brown.
And I don't want you to even consider thinking about it. I just want you to say yes, sir.
Bill admits history can't yet judge Joe Biden, but Bill already ranks him as the second worst ever.
Now it's we who face an unprecedented moment in the history of the Union.
Biden promised to bring America through COVID and reunite the country after Trump, but his own party forced him out after one term. His chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, the immigration crisis, and massive spending programs triggering the worst inflation in 40 years proved too much. And after a disastrous debate performance renewed questions about his cognitive decline, it was only a matter of time before he called it quits.
So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
You write, similar background as Bill OReilly, as you. What does that mean?
Well, Joe from Scranton, right? Bill from Levittown. Not much of a difference economically. Roman Catholic, Joe, Bill. Working class father who had a lot to say in the house, Joe, Bill. So there was some commonality there.
You call him the second worst president. That's a high bar.
And here's why. Because Biden created the problems. Most of these other terrible presidents walked into the problem and couldn't fix it. He created massive problems. Afghanistan? Are you kidding me? Sent a message to all the people who hate us, I'm weak. The border, Biden created the problems. It was under control with Remain in Mexico. He blasted it out with nothing to put in its place other than come on in. Now that problem is going to haunt the United States for decades. To create that kind of chaos, hundreds of thousands of deaths with fentanyl coming across that open border. How many families that shattered? No solution, never addressed it, doesn't care, trying to blame the other party. Awful. Same thing in the economy. He inherited 1.5% inflation, Biden.
Well, guess what?
And in the space of 2 years, it was more than 9%. Inflation crushed and continues to this day to crush working class Americans. All I've seen from Joe Biden is I'm going to do what the Democratic Party wants me to do. I've never seen an independent thought. I've never seen a conviction that we must get this done. I've never seen a reach out to try to heal the country as he promised. I don't see one thing that he's done to try to heal this country. Not one.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
You know, I have a lot of liberal friends, and when they start yammering about Biden, I look at them and I said, tell me one thing Joe Biden has improved in this country in his 3.5 years in office. Give me one. Crickets.
I love the job, but I love my country more.
I feel sorry for Biden. I don't dislike Joe Biden. I just think he's been a disaster for the country.
Do you feel sorry for the #1 worst president on Bill OReilly's list?
No. If I were in a time machine, I'd go back and slap him.
That when we come back.
Stay with us. The worst president ever has some competition. Richard Nixon resigned over Watergate. Jimmy Carter brought us 10% annual inflation. But for Bill OReilly, the worst is an easy choice. James Buchanan of Pennsylvania ran the country immediately before the Civil War. And OReilly says Buchanan could have prevented it.
He leads the league by a big margin.
Not even close.
This guy was the worst. I've studied this man, and it's just incredibly fascinating to me how inept he was. He stood for nothing. Nothing. So the big story was, we got to avert the Civil War, okay? The South is starting to attack Union depots. They're storing arms. They're organizing in brigades. They're terrorizing black people. They're...
As if keeping him in slavery wasn't terror enough.
Right. And Buchanan knows this. He does nothing. Doesn't send federal troops, doesn't cut off money. In fact, at Fort Sumter, when the Union forces are around, he wouldn't send ships to help them.
And at some point, you're putting somebody into an impossible job. Could anybody have prevented the Civil War?
I got a letter from Harry Truman that says if Andrew Jackson had been the president before Lincoln, there wouldn't have been a Civil War, which is probably true, because Andrew Jackson would have gone down there early before the Confederates consolidated their power militarily and kicked their butts all over the place.
That's what would have started the war himself.
There wouldn't have been a war. And Buchanan sitting up there, oh, let's have another party, have another drink. Big wine cellar, oh, hello. If I were in a time machine, I'd go back and slap him.
So Buchanan comes in and does nothing to avert the Civil War?
Nothing.
And you think that was intentional, or he was just out of his depth?
Hard to be a psychiatrist, but I am one of the few people on earth that have his book, all right, written in 1866, signed by him. So this is a very rare edition because Buchanan's book only sold about 3 copies. And he totally screwed up the rebellion, as we discussed.
He probably doesn't admit to that.
No, he blamed it all on Congress, on the cleaning lady, on the guys who cut the lawn, blamed it on everybody else but him. He blames Congress. Oh, Congress wouldn't do it. Congress wouldn't do this. Congress wouldn't do that. That's a bunch of garbage. He was the president. He did not lead. Because he didn't care. He didn't
care about the country.
He didn't care about the slavery issue, and that's the measure of a failure. When you see a problem and you don't even try to solve it, and you know millions of people are suffering because of it.
The South wasn't going to give up slavery without a fight, though, were they?
Then you fight him. James Buchanan was a coward. He didn't have enough guts to take on the problem, and everybody knew what the problem was. He wins the Triple Crown. Venal, cowardly, and stupid. And when I hear Trump say, Biden's the worst president, I go, no. Okay. Now, we all know why Trump's saying that.
The worst vice president in history. He's the worst president we've ever had.
And okay, he's not reading James Buchanan's biography like I did.
Of the bad presidents, those who were bad for America, was there a common personality trait, a common character flaw?
They were bad presidents because they failed to run the country effectively. And the most common failure was they didn't look out for the folks and they didn't do the right thing when the right thing was fairly apparent. But usually the right thing is the hardest thing to do.
We will have your list of the top 5 best presidents and why no modern president made the list when we come back. It's fun to dunk on the losers, but this country wouldn't be the greatest place on earth if all of its leaders were corrupt or cowardly, or both. So let's flip the script and kick off the countdown of Bill O'Reilly's best presidents ever, starting with a man who stood tall in times of crisis, even though he couldn't walk.
Number 5 is Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
It is your problem, my friends, no less than it is mine. Together, we cannot fail.
He saved the country during the Great Depression with the New Deal. It included Social Security, unemployment insurance, and public works projects. Then FDR saved the world in World War II.
All right, so we start with Bill O'Reilly's 5th best president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Right, flawed man.
Had affairs.
Yeah, well, I don't mind. So Franklin Roosevelt wanted to be a dictator. He didn't want Congress at all. He didn't want Supreme Court. He didn't want any of that.
Stacked the Supreme Court, right?
Right. He tried to. Failed. They cut him down, but he wanted to be a dictator.
For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world.
But anyway, Roosevelt had 2 enormous challenges, the Great Depression and World War II. And he handled both of them in a very methodical, courageous way, and he was successful. More so in World War II than in the Depression. The Depression elongated out until World War II began. That's what stopped the Depression. But in the meantime, Roosevelt layered in what we have today, and that's safety nets. So you don't starve to death, all right? And he did that. It was the first time in American history before that was you're on your own. He created that apparatus, and he created a lot of federal projects to give people work.
How much of FDR's ability to lead us through the Depression comes from his silver spoon upbringing?
You know, he lived a life of comfort, but he had polio. So it wasn't...
Which he hid.
Yeah, and the press allowed it. FDR, governed the way benevolent dictators govern. Okay, he had some empathy for those people, but he didn't want to associate with them. He was more emotionally involved with his stamp collection than he was with actual, folks.
But FDR's White House residence was far from lavish. O'Reilly writes FDR sleeps alone, his bedroom simply decorated with an iron frame cot, a chest of drawers, and a single chair. The Spartan furnishings befitting a leader in time of depression and war.
FDR, you would say, was the first maybe modern president who was also a military chief. So was FDR a great commander-in-chief?
I'd say he was a good commander-in-chief because he won. But FDR could have stopped a lot of the Holocaust and didn't, because his war council didn't want to divert Allied planes to bomb the tracks leading to
Auschwitz and Birkenau and everything else.
So he listened to them. You know, look, all men are flawed, but FDR is on a top 5 list because he was victorious.
FDR ran for president and won a record 4 times. In 1944, he chose a Kansas City hat maker as his running mate.
So they needed Truman on the ticket because the prior vice president had been too liberal. And the country after World War II changed to a more conservative nation. Roosevelt maybe talked to him 5 times. They had no relationship whatsoever. For Roosevelt, thought he was, you know, some bumpkin.
FDR, 4 terms. Was there a, I don't know, arrogance complex, savior complex, messianic complex?
He just liked the job.
Didn't have anything else to do?
Yeah, I mean, if he stepped down, he'd have to hang out with Eleanor. He didn't want to do that. It's a lot more fun out in Washington.
FDR's distant cousin and the inspiration for the teddy bear, the original Rough Rider, Theodore Roosevelt, comes in as number 4 on Bill O'Reilly's ranking of greatest presidents. In 1901, after fewer than 200 days as vice president, Theodore Roosevelt assumed the presidency following William McKinley's assassination. His term in office was defined by bold leadership and visionary reform.
Why does Teddy, who doesn't like Teddy, likes Theodore, why does Theodore rank above Franklin?
He liked Colonel best. If you want to get in good with President...
Not Mr. President, it was...
Colonel. Loved it. So Teddy Roosevelt is a guy who's raised in a very wealthy family, goes to Harvard, sickly guy, all right? A lot of maladies as a kid, doesn't have good eyesight, and he's angry about it. So he becomes a great boxer, an outdoorsman, a sportsman, embraces the robust life. Why Teddy Roosevelt makes the list, in my opinion, is that he brought an unbelievable amount of good feeling to the presidency because he was larger than life, no BS, no spin zone.
I was about to say the no spin zone.
He's the original no spin guy, Teddy.
You two would have gotten along.
I think we would have seen the world the same way. I don't know whether we gotten along or not.
First modern president who spanned the 19th, 20th century, but also a family man. Father, kids in the White House, pets in the White House. That's the nicest picture of the Roosevelt family you will ever see. And his kids adored him. Still in his boots. Yeah, he always wore his boots. And his kids adored him, but he had trouble with the oldest one. Alice. Alice was smoking and smuggling boys into the White House and drove Teddy crazy. Teddy rose the morale of America to the highest level. Because remember, he's coming off McKinley, coming off Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison, all these guys are, all right, yeah, they're there. Then Teddy becomes a superstar. Okay, he's the Taylor Swift of masculine men. Wherever he went, the crowds loved him. The morale. The Taylor Swift of masculine men. Right. Highest energy president by far, Teddy Roosevelt. All right, he was the original environmentalist. Conservation all over the place, and he's fair. He's a fair guy, all right? Not venal, austere in his social life. But he had a vision of the country. And the vision is that we should be robust, that we're the best country. Donald Trump would love to be Teddy Roosevelt, wouldn't he? I don't know about that, because it's a whole different thing. Trump likes the business world. He feels comfortable in the business world. He's a deal maker. Teddy wasn't a deal maker. Teddy would say, this is where it's going to be. If it's not, I'm going to kick your butt. And you'd love to have dinner with him, wouldn't you? Teddy would have been great, as long as he bought, because he ate a lot.
Coming up, the biggest surprise on the entire countdown. Number 3, all-time great. Kennedy, Reagan, think again. Bill O'Reilly's 3rd greatest president of all time isn't even a household name.
James K. Polk, a president on your best presidents list, probably that America knows the least about.
I don't know anything about.
Polk became governor of Tennessee, then served only 1 term as president in the 1840s. But in that term, he doubled the size of the country by winning the Mexican-American War.
This Polk He's got a nice little haircut there. It's a little effeminate, but that's all right. He'd do well in the Democratic Party today.
Sign of the times. Wearing a tuxedo, evening jacket.
He's got, no, he gets, I think this is velvet. He's got a little velvet jacket on, a little choker around the neck. I mean, that was the high fashion back then. And all I can say is I'm glad I didn't live in the 1840s. Polk was a very sickly child. He had to have all these operations, which ruined his health forever. And he's a governor of Tennessee. He's boring. And he gets elected because there really wasn't a lot of competition, and Andrew Jackson liked him. So Polk comes in, he immediately tells the American people, I'm only serving 4 years. That's it. One term, don't worry about me. He did that because he knew he was going to die. Polk knew. So he gets in, and he's looking at the map, and he's going, you know what? We should be from Washington to Portland, Oregon. We should be
sea to shining sea.
All of this should be ours. Okay, well, what is this stuff with Mexico? What is this stuff going on? We're going to take it all. Now, Mexico, one of the most corrupt countries on the planet to this day. But back then, it was even more corrupt. So Polk goes, you know, these guys are obnoxious. So they kind of engineer the Mexican-American War. Kick the Mexicans all over the place, take everything. California, everything comes to us. So he consolidates the entire country. And then he doesn't screw it up. He makes the list because he had vision, right? He saw it, and he made it happen. That's hard.
Polk was also a workaholic. In the book, O'Reilly writes, James K. Polk has no hobbies, avocations, or interests beyond politics. Even his enemies marvel at the intensity of his nonstop work habits.
He was working like Obama. Obama was the hardest working modern president. And that's why he didn't like Biden. Obama didn't like Biden because Biden was like taking a nap every 3 hours as vice president. So Polk was just, he never left. He worked himself to death.
Fair to say Polk's been forgotten by history?
Yeah. Nobody knows James Polk.
Is that because there was something not about him?
He's boring.
Because he didn't have an ego? He didn't need it?
Never.
He didn't aggrandize himself?
He didn't demonstrate any ego. And he was just a guy who luckily got elected and then expanded the nation to what we have today.
If James K. Polk simply brought us more land and Kennedy saved us from nuclear war and sent a man to the moon, how does Kennedy not qualify?
Kennedy had some very, very good achievements. The reason he didn't make the list was that he screwed up a lot. And it was kept from the American people.
Most overhyped president?
JFK, by far. JFK comes in, oh, it's Camelot. John Kennedy was a good president for the short time he was there, but he wasn't an activist president. Polk was an activist.
Polk expanded the footprint of our nation, but George Washington made the American idea possible. A hero of the Revolutionary War, Washington's presidency laid the cornerstone for a new nation, and he stepped down after 2 terms, cementing his legacy as a man who put country before self.
When doing your no-spin assessment of George Washington, how do you deal with the legend that he has become over 275 years?
I didn't deal with it. I don't care about the cherry tree or any of the stuff that's floating around. So Washington, I love him. How lucky are we as a country to have this guy? Number one, he should have lost the Revolutionary War because it was ridiculous, the most powerful army on earth and Navy, and Washington wins. Washington was really a courageous man. So here he's at Valley Forge, which is horrendous. So he writes to his spy. He says, come back and report to me. And then he signs, and that's the very famous George Washington signature. And then he's coronated. There was no election. You're president. And George says, okay, I'll be president. And he says, all right, we're going to organize the country into the states, but the federal government is going to call the shots. We're running the show, right? Because he knew there were a lot of loons in Georgia. Now, don't get mad at me if you live in Georgia, but the King of England sent all the convicts and mental people to Georgia, okay, on boats. So there were a lot of loons down there.
And to be fair, Georgia then was a little different than Georgia now.
Yeah, of course. Leland, thank you for pointing that out. Anyway, Washington knew that. So he said, we're going to have a strong federal government. And then if you look at the 8 years, it was an incredible growth process, almost all positive. But he laid the foundation for what we have today in a very effective way.
You studied him, you loved him.
Oh, he's the greatest guy.
What would he think of America now?
You know, he'd be bored by it. He wouldn't watch cable TV. He wouldn't go on social media. He'd be bored by it.
I was going to say, what bathrooms people go in would probably not be on George Washington's list of big problems.
But this extraordinary man faced ordinary problems.
So Washington and his mother didn't like the children at all. The mother didn't think George was giving her enough money. And so she wrote letters to the newspaper saying, my son is starving me.
Wait, so she didn't write letters to her son, she wrote letters to the newspaper?
To the newspapers. My son George is starving me. Drove him nuts. Washington didn't go to her funeral. Did
That's
not
dark.
go to his own mother's funeral. This is unbelievable. And nobody watching today was taught this in school.
All right, so when we come back, Bill O'Reilly's greatest president, and will we ever see another one?
Before we reveal Bill O'Reilly's pick for the greatest president of all time, it's time for the lightning round.
Easy questions, quick answers. Of all the presidents, who would you most like to have dinner with?
Probably Harry Truman, because he despised the press so much. I hated us. Hated us. And that would be a fun dinner.
Most disappointing thing you learned?
The corruption. It says selling the offices.
Is that everybody?
Not everybody,
but most.
A lot of them. Making backroom deals, hiring your relatives who stole money, that kind of stuff.
Of all the things in the book, what are you most proud of as a nugget that you ferret out?
That Abraham Lincoln almost committed suicide when his girlfriend, then soon-to-be wife, said, we're through, we're over. He was pondering it. His friends were worried about him.
He was distraught.
Abraham Lincoln didn't take his own life. His assassin, John Wilkes Booth, did. But in the years in between, Lincoln earned the #1 spot on our list. Savior of the Union, liberator of the slaves, Abraham Lincoln led the nation through its darkest hour.
I can't tell you how much I admire Abraham Lincoln. I mean, he's a guy, comes out of a rural upbringing, no formal education whatsoever, no uncle in the business, doesn't trade favors like all the others did, basically is lucky to get elected because he makes a speech in New York City that catches the eye of some big-time newspaper people. And he walks in and he goes, you know, I'm going to have to save this country. I'm going to have to save the Union. And I know it's going to be horrible, but I'm going to have to do it. And he did it.
So that makes him the best president.
By far.
By far.
Lincoln did bring a sense of morality into the White House with him. So Lincoln, he was driven to free the slaves, but at the same time, he didn't want to collapse the country. And he managed to do both. Therefore, he's #1, because that was quite an achievement.
One of my favorite things to do in Washington is go for an early morning run. You end up at the Lincoln Memorial, and you see the Gettysburg Address, and you see words of his second inaugural, the two famous speeches. What in his personality helped him understand what the nation needed at those moments?
Well, Lincoln's philosophy was shaped by the Bible. He wasn't a theocrat or a particularly religious person. I don't think he even went to church. But he read the Bible, and he took out of that all men are created equal. Lincoln was relentless in his belief that he was doing the right thing. And that's why he's the best president. The hatred toward Lincoln was far more than any other president ever, okay? And he endured it.
This is 1864.
Yeah, Lincoln is running for re-election, and McClellan is running on the Democratic ticket. Lincoln had fired General McClellan because he was a terrible general. So he got into politics, and McClellan, as you can see in this poster, is a racist.
You will defeat Negro equality, restore prosperity, reestablish the Union in an honorable, permanent, and happy peace.
And if you vote for Lincoln, you will bring on Negro equality, more debt, harder times, another draft.
Universal anarchy and ultimate ruin.
Arrest Trump now!
Trump says, I'm the most vilified president. Lincoln was far more vilified because of the slavery issue. He was one persistent SOB. You couldn't derail this guy. He gets knocked down, he gets back up.
But the times make the man. And through the Cold War, a financial crisis, and a pandemic, nobody made Bill O'Reilly's top 5 list.
The problems that we have now are not of a historic nature.
So the times make the man. To be great, you must have that moment.
The challenges make the man.
If we were to take from the book how normal men either become great presidents or terrible presidents or caretaker presidents, what are the lessons in the book for either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
Well, you got to put the country, the welfare of the people above your own self-interest. So you're putting the welfare of other people above your own welfare. We don't see that much.
So the modern presidency has become what?
A machine. They're more machine than people. And they do what they're told. Too much money in it. Too much ideology.
Will ever have another great president?
Yeah, I do. I think that someone will come along to reunite the country to a certain extent, because we're too divided now, obviously. But we need a president, and not only that, but leaders on all levels that will say, look, I might lose, but I'm going to do the right thing, and this is why I believe it's the right thing to do.
We end tonight's presidential countdown with the words of a founding father who never became president, though he did make it onto the $100 bill. Benjamin Franklin called America a republic, if you can keep it. Remember, the government you elect is the government you deserve. So don't forget to vote. I'm Leland Vittert. I'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen. And don't forget, click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.